Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good and the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Rafe, and I've got a solo job this week. We're going to do some little storytelling and some anecdotes related to those stories along the way. So before I go any further, of course, thank you to all the listeners. We appreciate you coming here and spending your drive time or your rest time or your introspective time with us here at the Buff. We are grateful for you being out there, and we would be nothing without you. Remember, if you need to get hold of us, you can contact us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all sorts of other little places out there. We're probably places, there are places that we are that no one's ever heard of. How's that sound? That's where we are everywhere. And you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm out here, I'm listening. How can I help the Buff? And the answer is, to share the love, to share the Buff, tell your friends to listen, and you will get a free episode and get them to subscribe and give us a 5-star review. And that will help everyone. The world will be a better place for you to do that. So that's what we need from you. And if you do that, we will be eternally grateful. So, hey, so here, today's story. Today's story is kind of is an interesting one, in that it relates to something that hasn't happened to me before, although maybe a few times in the past. But before we start, you need to know where we are. Okay, so we moved here to Central Indiana from Central Tennessee back about a year ago, and we live currently in in your standard suburban neighborhood. We have a little rental home that we're using right now while we build a house less than 3 miles away. And we are near the White River, near Cool Creek, which drains into the White River. And the White River is a tributary of the Ohio, which of course contributes to the Mississippi. So, and Indiana, it's a pretty flat place, and there's not a lot of interesting topography, but here and there near the rivers, there is some interesting topography. We're not getting cliffs and ravines and canyons like they might out at the Colorado River, like we've talked about before. And we don't have mountains and seascapes and things like that, but we have some rolling hills here and there. We have some. We have a lot of flat land, which makes for great farming. But one thing it doesn't give you typically is it gives you a couple things. It gives you rivers that tend to meander more instead of flow nice and straight, and they are easily dammed for reservoirs. And what matters here is the number of lakes that exist now in the Central Indiana area that have been constructed due to strategic damming of certain rivers. And this matters because certain wildlife tend to appreciate living in aquatic environments. And some of my one of my favorite birds that I've seen of late is the great blue heron. And there's a little retention pond, not a dammed reservoir, but a retention pond that I walk past almost daily when I take my daily walk to maintain my slim, healthful figure that I have. And so there's a heron that always stands on this little outcropping, I guess, on this little retention pond, and he looks for fish, or maybe it's a she, looks for fish, and gobbles them up, and then flies along and goes to other little ponds in the neighborhood. So there's a lot of little bodies of water. There are some bigger bodies of water that are some reservoirs. and there's a lot of interesting wildlife there. What is interesting to me is that the heron, these great blue herons, I think they're what they're called. These are big birds. These are these are kind of scary birds if you see them up close. They look incredibly prehistoric when they fly. You can, if you're a Jurassic Park movie fan, these look just like the dinosaurs when they fly. They're kind of spooky, and they help you agree with the current theory that the dinosaurs are still among us, but in bird form. So there's a heron that always hangs out at this little pond, and we have been growing up. My father is I don't want to say a wildlife nut, because that's not fair, but he introduced us to tremendous adoration for wildlife and things out in the field. We weren't big hunters and fishers, but we were always to be keen on what's happening with the birds and small mammals, trees, flowers, and plants. Anytime there was a hawk sitting on a stop sign or circling overhead, we were always pointing those things out. It was it's interesting. My wife says, why do you always point out hawks? And I was like, well, they're kind of cool. It's interesting to see them. And the thing was, like, back in the day, there weren't very many hawks. At least it doesn't seem to me that there were as many as there are now. And the herons I've seen of late is nothing compared to, it was nothing back when I was a kid compared to what we have now. And the other day, I was driving back from an appointment in the morning, and I drove past the little church next to our neighborhood, and lo and behold, circling above the broad green space near the church, where there are 3 of these retention ponds. What to my wondering eyes should appear, but what looked to be a raptor of very large size, and not just your regular hawk, but this thing was kind of dark in the middle and white on the head and had a white tail. And I thought, oh my goodness, that is a bald eagle. And the last time I had seen a bald eagle, and if you remember on this show maybe a year ago, Zach and I were mentioning that I was down visiting Harry in North Carolina, and in the winter I had seen a bald eagle there in North Carolina, and he was cruising. Quite frankly, he was cruising down the interstate. But here I am in Westfield, Indiana, in a very suburban location, right next to the big suburban church with the grassy field out front with a little retention pond. And there is a bald eagle circling, and then it kind of dove to the turf and kind of plopped itself down and sat right next to the water there. And so I pulled into the church. Turned out there was a policeman there working on some reports, waiting for people to speed by and get into trouble. And I talked to him. I said, is that a bald eagle out there? And he goes, oh my goodness, that is. So we both appreciated the natural beauty of that animal. And then it got up and it flew around for a little bit more and sat back down on the grass. And I thought that was rather interesting. And so I saw a bald eagle on Monday. And I thought to myself, this is a wonderfully interesting thing. Here I am in Westfield, Indiana, not known for its wildlife habitat, but there's the bald eagle circling, landing, being unafraid of the urbanism or the suburbanism that is taking over the broad swath of central Indiana. And I thought that was kind of interesting. On Tuesday, I was pretty excited about that. On Wednesday, I came to the realization that the little town just west of us, just west of Westfield, this little wide part in the road where we slow down from 45 to 30. That little place is called Eagleville. And I thought, well, of course, there's an eagle here in Westfield. He probably lives in Eagleville. Eagletown. He lives in Eagletown. And that was the only joke I could get out of that. And so I went about my week. And today, which just happens to be a Sunday, I was walking from our new house here to the rental house, and I was walking past another retention pond that sits in our neighborhood, and I saw my friend the great blue heron standing there where he normally stands, looking out, trying to figure out which fish he's going to eat. And I saw there with him or her 2 of these I never can tell if they're egrets or if they're cranes or if they're herons but I read about some herons, and there's the great blue heron, but apparently they can also be white. These herons can, I guess, if they're young. What do they call them? Fledglings. If they are the birds that aren't quite full grown, they can be white. And there was a white heron and the great blue heron standing there, pretty much surveying all they own there. And as I walked along, I thought to myself, I ought to talk about these herons sometime on the podcast. And I looked back up and I saw the great blue heron cruising along the surface of the pond. He had gotten up and decided to fly. And I looked the other direction and I saw the white one along with another white one now moving over to the side of the pond and perching themselves on top of a tree. And I thought, well, I wonder if a kid ran over there and spooked them. And it turns out it was no kid that came to spook them. What came to spook them was, yeah, you guessed it, a bald eagle. All right, so I've seen 2 bald eagles in the last 6 days, or I've seen the same bald eagle twice. And so I started doing some thinking about the bald eagle issue. And my friends up there in Wisconsin, you probably are seeing these guys all the time. But here in Indiana, these are not quite as popular or as prevalent, I guess, as they may be in some more woodsy areas. There are lots of bald eagles, for example, in Alaska and in the Pacific Northwest. And the bald eagle is a sea eagle. And here in Indiana, we do not have a lot of oceans. And that's why I started with this idea. We are living on the White River, essentially. Cool Creek drains into the White River. And these ponds and these lakes that have been built provide really the only aquatic habitat in the central part of the state, other than a couple places where the river gets wide. And so there's an eagle somewhere nearby, and there's probably a pair because they tend to be together. Birds of a feather flock together. And so I started reading about this, and the chronology of eagle nesting in Indiana on the indiana.gov site, Department of Natural Resources, tells me that in 1989, there were 2 nesting territories of eagles in Indiana. 2. There were 2. And a decade later, in 1999, there were 21. In 2009, there were 94. In 2010, there were 120. And then they stopped. They stopped counting eagles because they were pretty much everywhere. And the eagles are rampant, if that's the right word to use for bald eagles. They are everywhere, and they are even in places like Westfield, Indiana. And to me, it's remarkable because those of us who are my age, we remember when eagles were in short supply, when in the lower 48 states they were endangered, if not extinct in certain states. And back in 1970 something, the eagles were super threatened, I guess, whatever the term is, or endangered. And it turns out in 1995, the eagle was pulled off the endangered species list and moved to the threatened species list, and then was moved off the threatened species list in the contiguous 48 states in 2007. So it's been almost it's been close to 15 years. It's been over 15 years that the bald eagle has not been on that list, and they are pretty much now everywhere. And that to me is interesting because bald eagles, it says here on this internet thing I'm reading, they are found typically near large bodies of open water with abundant food supply and old growth trees for nesting. And I guess that description does not really lend itself to central Indiana. So I'm just I have sent a note to the Department of Natural Resources because they like to know when people see eagles in the area because they track that sort of thing. But it got me thinking more about the wildlife that we see on a regular basis. And I think that is a thing that the current generation is missing. And it's unfortunate because they aren't getting to see all the neat little stuff, all the salamanders that you find when you poke yourself underneath a rock and you turn over a rock or an old log and see what's underneath, or you go in the woods and you hike around. That's something that Zach and I talk about quite a bit on this show, is the need to get back out and get back to nature and see all those things that are out there. On Tuesday, I saw the eagle. Today, I saw the eagle, but yesterday morning, Michelle and I were driving through Suburbia, and we were cruising down one of the main streets, And what trots out of one of the major subdivisions here on the north side of town was your friend Wile E. Coyote. The coyotes are everywhere now. About 100 years ago, coyotes were extinct east of the Mississippi here in North America, and now there are coyotes. There are coyotes in every county in the United States, including Manhattan, and the coyotes are doing great. I was informed when we were visiting out in Montana about a decade and a half ago that it was the first time I saw the bald eagle. We were canoeing on the Missouri River. I was told that they are coyotes and not coyotes. In fact, they would tell us that they were able to tell who was and who was not a city slicker by how they said coyote or coyote. So if you want to be in the know, the right thing to say is coyote. So we saw the coyote Saturday morning, just trudging along through traffic here in suburban Indiana, and there's a red-tailed fox, I guess is what it's called. There's a fox that lives right out in the woods behind the houses that face ours. One day I was sitting here in my little office. The shade was open in the front window here, and right across the front porch of our little house traipsed the fox that lives in our area. So those guys are running rampant. Deer, of course, are everywhere here in North America now, certainly in the U.S. It's interesting. I read an article. Oh gosh, this probably had to be a decade ago, and it was in this was in I think in the New York Times. It was either the Times or the Wall Street Journal. I think it was in the Times, and it talked about how nature. The natural world seems to like suburbia. And it was an interesting take, certainly for a paper like the Times. But it said that there is back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, back when when I was just coming into being, when my father was just a regular young adult, doing things that people used to do in the Midwest. They said that the sighting of deer in the wild would produce that was worthy of a news story. All right, you would see, the little local papers would say that Davy Johnson saw a deer out on Route 4 standing in the field eating the corn or whatever it was. Those were big news because there were not a lot of them back then. The deer now in Connecticut, I hear, are more populous than they have been since ever. They love what we provide for them as far as food and water. They'll eat all the plants that we have out there. There are no more large predators. That's part of the issue, I think. The panthers and the coyotes aren't taking down a lot of deer, although I think if they got hungry enough, the coyotes would. But there's plenty of other things for them to eat. There are rabbits and squirrels. The squirrels that grow here in Indiana are monstrously huge, certainly compared to the ones we had in Tennessee and the ones I remember when I was a child. These things are big. They're the size of small dogs. Gigantic red squirrels. They look a little bit scary. They're like lifting weights. You ever seen those videos of the kangaroos that in Australia? These guys that are all jacked up and they look like they've been hitting the weight room. These some of these animals are looking kind of scary, even the ones that you tend to consider to be relatively harmless. All right, so we used to see raccoons a lot when I was a kid, and that was the big animal we would see would be raccoons. You'd see them driving at night. Well, you wouldn't see the raccoons driving at night. You would see when you were driving at night raccoons, and their little lights, their eyes would light up when the car lights hit them. And they would skulk back into the brush on the side of the road. But I don't see a lot of raccoons anymore. We saw a lot of possums. The possums were everywhere in Tennessee. They were, they sleep under your porch and they, come and eat the bugs and keep the other vermin away. Lots of snakes, turkeys, the wild turkeys that I saw in Nashville, certainly, and here even in Indiana, A flock of turkeys is called a rafter. I learned that when I was there. They were so abundant. They were called. I learned what they were called. I learned what the young ones were called. They're called poults. We had a turkey nest in our backyard one spring when we lived in Nashville. The turkeys there. I haven't seen any badgers. I saw a badger once in Utah along the side of the road, but not here in the Midwest. Like I said, the hawks have been everywhere. We've had vultures everywhere. When I was in 6th grade at Central Middle School in Hartford, Wisconsin, who was the English teacher in 6th grade? Dr. Kipe, perhaps? I was sitting there looking out the window, as I typically did during my 6th grade English class. And what dropped upon the window there out the north-facing window of Central Middle School up on the 3rd floor there, but a belted kingfisher came and landed right on the windowsill, and it was one of the most remarkable birds I had ever seen. And I knew what the belted kingfisher was because in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, I took summer school at Rossman or Lincoln Elementary School, and we took Don Friedman's nature study class. And it kind of, the curriculum rotated year after year. One year we studied insects, and one was small mammals and birds, and one year it was trees and plants and meteorology. And we learned all sorts of wonderful science stuff. And I do remember we learned what a kingfisher was. Beautiful looking birds. And I'd never seen one in the wild until that day in English class. And obviously it's made quite an impression on me. But the last kingfisher I saw was in Brentwood, Tennessee, right along the golf course, sitting on a wire. Every night when I would drive home from work, it would sit on the wire looking out, I don't know, at the traffic or the golfers or whatever it was, hunting for fish in the little creek that was near the golf course. So I've seen those remarkable birds. There are killdeer everywhere. Those of us who did the nature study thing learned that they have a mechanism to allow them to distract their prey away from the nest, and then they feign injury, so they look very enticing to a predator, and then they stumble away from their nest, and they get you to chase them, and then when you get close, they fly away, they taunt you. My brother, living in Brentwood, has had a bobcat at his house on regular occasions. And like I said, we've seen coyotes everywhere. I've seen gigantic coyotes in Nashville. I would see about one a month when I was there, all over the parks there. Animals love suburbia. They provide a whole bunch of shelter underneath decks and in the foliage we build for them. We have lots of water supplies. People put in little ponds and bird baths, retention spaces, culverts, and things like that. And there's a lot of food there for them. There's food for the herbivores, and the herbivores provide food for the carnivores. So the humans like suburbia, and it seems like a lot of animals do too. Now, I'm not going to say that we should not have any unruffled spaces, but there are a lot of places where life will find a way, as Dr. Malcolm says from the Jurassic Park movie, it will find a way to make do with what it has. So you will tend to see these things out in suburbia. Hummingbirds, birds of all kinds. Just put out a bird feeder, and it'll be amazing what you will find. In Brentwood, they have this. They have some white deer. Now, Zach and I have talked about this on a previous episode. We got into the little discussion. He claims to have seen an albino deer in Brentwood. He said even the eyes were pink. Rafe has seen a white deer in Nolensville, which is right outside of Brentwood. And I'm of the belief that the white deer was what is called a leucist deer. It suffers from leucism, Leucism, and that is not lack of all pigment, but it's the lack of the pigment cell differentiation and migration. So sometimes you'll get these leucismic animals will have pigment in some places, but not in other places, and they will be pied or piebald And sometimes the deer will be very pretty. They'll be spotted almost like a horse. So there's all sorts of white animals out there. So there's a bevy of them, those interesting deer in outside of Brentwood, and there's a whole bunch of them in Seneca, Pennsylvania. There's an army depot. In New York, in Seneca County, New York, and a long time ago, the army put a big fence around this gigantic area. 24-mile fence was around there, so you can do the calculus and figure what the area of that is. But they say it's something like 10,000 acres. And this was put up in 1941, and pretty much the deer were stuck inside the fence, and the predators were stuck outside the fence. And one of the depot commanders was told the soldiers they could not hunt the white deer that were in that population. So what was a genetic trait that was ill-suited to survival back in the day suddenly became highly suitable to survival for deer within the pen there in Seneca County, New York. And the white deer are very common there. There's almost half of the population of the white deer in the Seneca Army Depot wildlife fenced-in area they are white. They're not albino. They're leucismic, and that's kind of an interesting thing. And they tend to be all over. Other birds we've seen. You've seen cardinals everywhere, and robins, and blue jays, and finches, and so I guess you know what else I saw is we see mice everywhere. Those are kind of not very much fun. I don't see a lot of rats, but it may not be the right area for that. One time when I was at the shopping mall in Franklin, Tennessee, not far from where I worked in Cool Springs. One day I was walking there, and there's a little creek along the road there between the shopping mall and the mall itself. I was walking over the little bridge, going to go get some lunch at the food court, I think. And I looked into the river, and there in the river was an otter. And I'd never seen an otter in the wild. And I watched the otter, and he did otter things. They swim around on their back, and they look cute, and I don't know what else they do. If they're sea otters, they tend to dive down and pick up clams and open them up and eat them. But this was just a wood otter there in central Tennessee, and I thought that was rather interesting. So I went back to my office and I checked the Wikipedia page, and it told me that otters were rare and they didn't exist in Tennessee, and they'd been run out of town on a rail, and so I called the Department of Otters there in Tennessee. What was the Wildlife Service, whatever it was. And after being routed from person to person to person, I finally got somebody who would talk to me about otters. And I told this lady, I said, I saw an otter here in Franklin at the creek next to the mall. And she said, okay, what do you want us to do? And I said, well, I thought you would like to know because, otters are rare and there's none in Tennessee anymore. And she was like, well, where'd you hear that? I said, well, see, and then I got embarrassed because I said I read it on the internet, and as I started saying that, I realized that was a dumb thing to say, but it was true, so I said it anyway. She goes, no, we have so many otters in Tennessee. She said we have so many otters that there's not even a season for them in Tennessee. You can hunt all you want, and you won't take them out. There's just so many of them. It's incredible. So, these animals are out there, and they are living right among us, and we typically have no idea they are there. So it is interesting to me when we start to see these animals that we haven't seen, and part of it for me is to get outside, put down the damn phone, all right, and just walk and look and think and listen and see, count the trees, look at the species, and if you can, get to the suburban parks. Get to the places that are a little bit less polished, places where where there are boundaries between different. The boundary areas contain all the interesting stuff because they tend not to get mowed, they tend not to get fertilized or weed killed, and you will see all sorts of things when you step outside the monoculture, that is the soybean field, the cornfield, or the grass field that's in your front yard. So if you can step away from that, you will find a plethora of interesting species, fun little insects that you never knew existed, a zillion different kinds of praying mantis, butterflies galore. I noticed that there are different kinds of tiger swallowtails. When we had butterfly bushes, you could see all those sorts of things. So get out there in nature, go see those things, find something interesting, and then send the Buff a note. Let us know what you've seen. Let us know if you've seen the bald eagles, where they are in your neck of the woods, as they say. I'm really looking forward to finding out where the nest is for these eagles. Apparently, the Indiana Department of Natural Resources keeps a list of where the nests are, and I'm guessing this nest is a little bit west of here, probably over there in Eagletown. But I would find it giddily funny if that eagle was making a nest in the bell tower at the church. That would crack me up something fierce. So anyway, whatever you do, get out there, seek the good, be the good, spread the good, and enjoy the adventure of life.